When the life sciences industry gathers in San Francisco for the J.P. Morgan Healthcare Conference Week, will you be ready? It's important you're able to take advantage of all the opportunities. Don't get left behind. Big 3 Bio has created BioWeek SF, an online resource that guides you through event schedules, receptions, meeting space information, and consulting services. It provides exclusive savings and more to help attendees make the most of their JP Morgan week. Go to bioweeksf.com for more information. That's bioweeksf.com. I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. We conclude our Biotech Review Preview series with our final installment this week as the industry readies for the J.P. Morgan Healthcare Conference. We spoke to John Gardner, U.S. News Editor for EP Vantage, about the EP Vantage 2018 preview, the outlook for big value drug launches, and whether deal-making or clinical successes will drive stock prices in 2018. As a note, this podcast was recorded prior to Spark Therapeutics' announcement of its pricing for its gene therapy, Luxturna. John, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
We're going to talk about the upcoming J.P. Morgan Annual Healthcare Conference in San Francisco, which kicks off the new year in biotech, the EP Vantage 2018 preview, and what's ahead in the new year. Let's start with 2017, though. What kind of a year was it for new drug approvals and perhaps more importantly for high value? How high value were the drugs that were approved?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because we have just today, on the day we're recording this, of course, the approval of the very first gene therapy in the U.S., Luxturna, which treats a form of inherited blindness, but in fact, it was an approval that was expected to be have happened in 2018. So the answer is it's difficult for me to tell you exactly the total value because we've had a couple of surprises in the last couple of days. But I can tell you that we had forecast about 43 drugs to be approved in 2017, and approximately $31.6 billion worth of fifth-year sales value, which is the highest we've ever measured, higher than in 2015 when there were actually 56 drugs approved. So it's been a very good year. A lot of very innovative drugs have been approved this year, including the first two CAR T drugs in cancer. So it's been an exciting year. It's been a real return to form for the FDA, especially since 2016 came in a little bit disappointing for many people.
There's been a lot of attention to the new immuno-oncology drugs. You mentioned the first two CAR T therapies that were approved. The top of the big value launches to 2018, though, are drugs for diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, and as you mentioned, Luxturna, rare disease therapies. What will you be watching for in 2018?
In 2018, the biggest potential launch that we see is Gilead's new HIV triple drug, which would be forecast at about $5 billion worth of sales by 2022. It's an interesting case because it obviously will be replacing other assets that in HIV that Gilead has. But we're also looking at launches in another oncology launch in the form of a new checkpoint inhibitor called epacadostat from Incyte, which is approximately a $2 billion launch, and the new MS drug ozanimod from Celgene, which is a competitor in Gilenia's class.
Big approval today, as you mentioned, with Luxturna. There's been a lot of speculation, though, about the price tag of the new gene therapy, which has now been approved. What are you expecting in terms of the discussion around that therapy and what it might do for what comes behind it?
I think you're going to see you'll probably see sort of a separate track. Certain drugs, certain of these gene therapies are for extremely small populations. For example, Strimvelis, which was approved in Europe this year, a gene therapy, is something along the lines of a 1 in a million. 1 per million live births, and so it's a very small population and a very arguably high cost condition, which relies on a lot of chronic care. In this case, you have a demonstrable benefit from a $1 million drug that you use only once. In the case of Luxturna, the balance is going to be slightly different because the medical costs aren't quite so extreme. You obviously have a blind patient who will see their quality of life rise pretty substantially if they get this drug, but it's a little more difficult to make that $1 million price tag argument that everyone's been talking about. So I think it's really going to depend on how much medical cost you're averting, and and the size of the population.
And looking at the comments from Spark during their last quarterly conference call, they make a case for the drug based on its societal benefits and not just the cost of the healthcare system, but really the broader cost of someone who's unable to work and all of that. Is there an issue for how payers are going to look at that? Is that going to be relevant to the calculus they use?
I think the payers don't, and it's a very good argument to make, and that's a very good policy discussion to make. I think the payers, for their part, have to look at also the benefit that they see from it, from paying for it, especially given that in the U.S. People change insurers quite frequently. It's going to be a more difficult argument to make. I think in the end, Spark's case will win the day to a certain degree, but there will probably have to be some concessions that the gene therapy makers make in order to really get this through with the payers.
With regard to the new immunotherapies we're seeing, there's been some impressive clinical results, and we've got a pipeline of studies with combination therapies in 2018. Anything you'll be watching closely?
Well, I think the thing that has risen lately is as some of these immunotherapies, particularly the PD-1 checkpoint inhibitors, have attempted to advance through the events into earlier and earlier treatment lines. We've seen, I think, more failures in second line and first line treatments and as monotherapies. So we'll have to actually be on the lookout for exactly what the limitations of the immunotherapies actually are, because I think we're starting to see that with a number of trials that have not succeeded. But as always, if you're looking for the things that will be big steps forward for immuno-oncology, it will be in the big indications like lung cancer.
And what will it take to see these clinical successes translate into market successes?
Well, that's a good question, but because many of them are very expensive, and I think, again, as with the gene therapies, if it's not exactly a life-saving setting, for example, it will be difficult to argue for premium pricing. but I think there have been some massive steps forward, and the data really carries the case for the. If we're speaking specifically of immuno-oncology, the data have really carried the case for their use in earlier and earlier lines, and with different combinations of treatments.
Despite the Gilead Kite deal, I think most people were expecting more to happen on the M&A front during the past year. With tax reform now looking like a done deal, do you expect a pickup there, and are there any likely acquirers or targets you'll be watching?
Well, I would always look to Pfizer, first of all, and the Pfizer CEO Ian Reid has made very explicit that he's not interested in doing any M&A until the tax reform has been resolved, because the tax situation obviously alters the valuations of any target companies. So I would, at Pfizer, always, whenever there's a merger and acquisition wave, Pfizer always seems to be on the leading edge of it, and others seem to react. So I would obviously look to them. I think that there are companies with legacy product, with massive legacy products in highly price constrained environments that might want to beef up their pipeline and do different things. So perhaps Eli Lilly, as an example, which still has heavy exposure in the diabetes market, might want to strengthen itself in other disease areas. It's done a good job in oncology of late, but it might do well to lessen its exposure to its diabetes franchise. Bristol Myers Squibb has been touted as a target for a long time, and it remains so.
One reason we may not have seen more M&A is that it seems to have been a market where sellers have the upper hand today, and there's plenty of cash around, which provides company in need of capital alternatives. EP is expecting a 2018 to be a good IPO market. Will you be looking for any indicators at JP Morgan as to what you're going to see on that front?
Well, I think anyone who I don't know that private companies presented JP Morgan, but I think that if the private company says they're going to IPO, that would be an obvious indicator. I think that if you see, if for example, there's always seems to be a lot of share movement around JP Morgan that tends to lift all boats higher, shall we say? So if we see a sudden run up at JP Morgan of the, in particular, the Nasdaq Biotechnology Index, that might be a sign that more companies might be able to go out and do IPOs. So that would be one clear indicator I would look for.
What do you expect to drive biotech stocks in 2018? Is it going to be clinical successes or deal activity?
It will probably be a combination of both. I think clinical. I would say the clinical successes will be greater because, as we've discussed earlier, there is that tension between the sellers market. The biotechs are fully valued as it stands, and their prices become very difficult to justify. So if you see clinical successes, you're probably going to be the bigger driver of share price movement.
In the 2018 preview, you've got a chart of biggest changes in forecast for the sales of individual drugs. This includes on the downside Enbrel and Remicade. I'm wondering, is that a sign that biosimilars are starting to have an impact?
I think it's true that biosimilars are having an impact more in Europe than in the U.S., but they are coming, and in many cases, it may not be necessarily the competition as much as it is the anticipation of competition, where companies are signing multi-year deals, at a fixed price in advance of biosimilar launches in order to shore up their sales and sort of defend the franchise into or past their patent expiration date.
We've had a new FDA commissioner this year, Scott Gottlieb. He's been well received among industry. Any chance that the agency is sacrificing safety for speed? Has the FDA lowered the bar or just cleared the aisle?
Well, if you ask the FDA, they haven't changed it. What I will say that there were probably some products approved of late that were not necessarily unsafe products, but showed to have marginal efficacy over competition, or marginal efficacy in their indication in general. And the FDA has decided more or less to say, we'll approve it and we'll just kick it over to the payers to let them make the hard choices, which isn't necessarily fair to the payers, because then it makes them look bad politically. And anytime you see as many approvals and as fast of approvals as we've seen in the past year, I think you have to worry about the next Vioxx. And I'm not saying that there will be a case as egregious as Vioxx, but you do have to worry about it.
With Brexit, we know the EMA is now headed to new headquarters in Amsterdam. Any reason to think that will pose any kind of a disruption to the industry?
I can't say for certain. I think the EMA would probably insist that it won't, but that's a very big move. You're moving a lot of people. Anytime you're asking staff to move across across countries, that's disruptive to the entire staff, and it's going to make it it may cause some difficulties with productivity in EMA. It would be hard for me to see a situation where the EMA move does not cause some disruption. The level of disruption is very difficult to say. I don't think that it would cause drugs to be delayed by years, but it may be a case where some drugs that are expected to be heard by the EMA, 1 month gets strung out a couple extra months because simply the people aren't in place to do the job.
So as you think ahead to JP Morgan, any bellwethers you'll be watching, any companies you'll be looking to hear from particularly, or will the hallway conversations tell you the most?
I think the hallway conversations probably tell everybody the most, but I would look to find out what Big Pharma is doing to, get people more excited about their product offerings, their pipelines, and also their business development activities. Because I think that's been one of the stories of the year is that biotechs are on the up, and Big Pharma has been rather in the doldrums. I would look for anyone announcing big if this indeed happens, M&A or data. It sometimes happens at JP Morgan. So those would be the two things I would look for.
John Gardner, U.S. News Editor for EP Vantage. John, thanks as always.
Thanks for having me.
If you'd like to get a copy of the EP Vantage 2018 preview, you can download it from the Evaluate site at www.evaluategroup.com. Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.